I'm Brian Lewandowski, Director of Executive Education at Leeds and Executive Director of the Business Research Division. I have announcements to make and a few housekeeping items. First, please type your questions into the Q&A portal. It's found at the bottom of your screen, and our moderator will do his best to field those questions and provide them to our panelists. Second, this webinar is being recorded, so we can share it out with people who were not able to join us live today. I wanted to mention a little bit of future programming. We had to postpone our Cannabis Entrepreneurship Academy that we were planning on hosting on the CU Boulder campus in June. This is postponed until 2021. In lieu of that academy, we do plan to have a one-day short course on June 15th, and you can register for this short course at cu.law/execed. We do still plan to do the full 4-day Entrepreneurship Academy in 2021. It will happen next June, so stay tuned for the exact dates for that program. What's unique about that program, it is a blend of law and business curriculum. So now turning to our webinar, these are truly unprecedented times, both socially and economically. In the early days of the epidemic, we viewed the crisis as having a supply side shock on the US economy, as that supply chain was really disrupted coming out of China. As it turned from epidemic to pandemic, this really shifted from a supply side shock to a demand side shock, really shaking consumer confidence, a willingness on the part of consumers to purchase goods and services within the economy, and also impacting consumers' ability to buy as retailers and restaurants and the tourism industry was shut down, as well as many other industries. Despite the economic downturn really beginning in March, we expect first quarter GDP to have fallen, so that March decline will bring down the entire quarter. We also project second quarter GDP to be the sharpest decline in our lifetime, with a double-digit decrease. We observed initial unemployment claims spike by a record amount to never before seen levels in April, with 22 million Americans and 233,000 Coloradans signing up for unemployment benefits over the past 4 weeks alone. And just for some context, that's more than the cumulative number of initial filings over the past 2 years leading up to this crisis. We've also seen a spike in worker adjustment and retaining notifications. These are the warn notices that come out when there are some mass layoffs by companies. The federal government has rolled out an unprecedented stimulus package coupled by aggressive measures by the Federal Reserve. Colorado went into lockdown in late March. The cannabis industry was deemed as an essential industry, and operators have largely remained open for business. The cannabis industry, though, is not immune to the economic pains felt by other businesses, which brings us to our panel today. We've been asked many questions about how the industry has been impacted and how businesses are coping. And to help us answer these questions and provide helpful suggestions, we're joined by our moderator and presenter, Christian Sederberg, who's the founding partner of Vincente Sederberg, LLP. Christian has very deep roots in the industry. In addition to representing many cannabis companies, he helped usher in the legalization of retail marijuana with the passage of Amendment 64, as well as the taxation of the industry. We're thrilled to have Christian as a moderator today, along with our 3 panelists. We have Chuck Smith, who is President and CEO of Dixie Brands, Dan Pabon, who's General Counsel and Chief Government Affairs Officer with Medicine Man Technologies, and Ryan Brown, who is CEO of Native Roots Cannabis and Garden Variety. And all of their full bios are found on the law school website. But I'm going to turn it over to Christian to open up our panel session.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I appreciate everyone attending. I hope everyone's healthy, safe, and all their friends, family, employees, I hope the same. One quick adjustment, Dan Pabon is actually, I'll let you take it over in a second, Dan, but has a new name of his company. This is how quick this industry moves. But looking forward to having a very good panel, and honestly just really interested to hear what they have to say as everything is moving so quickly. So I'm going to kick it off by Dan. Do you want to tell us how you spent your 420, and then I'll turn it over to Chuck and Ryan to maybe elaborate a little bit. But it sounds like you had an interesting day. There you go.
Yeah, it was a fun day. It was a fun-filled day, as I'm sure many folks in the cannabis industry had. Ours was unique in that we rolled out a new branding for Medicine Man Technologies. We are now known as Schwaz, doing business as Schwaz, which for those of you who don't know, schwazing is a technique that's used during cultivation to increase the number of buds and flowers that you have coming out of your plant. One of our chief cultivation officers coined the term, Josh Hopt, and so we thought it was an apt name for the growing of a new company and a new way of doing cannabis business. We were also yesterday had another chock-filled announcement where we announced the first acquisition of its kind. I'm fairly certain. First publicly traded company, which is Medicine Man Technologies, acquired Mesa Organics, 4 retail stores and a MIP in Pueblo yesterday. So that was a history-making day, all on 420. So the excitement was large, and it's just an exciting day to see the next evolution of cannabis. Christian, you and I have been working on this for quite a while together, and it's just exciting to see these next few waves and changes.
Great, thanks, Dan. Yeah, Dan was a state legislator in 2012 and majority leader in the House of Representatives here in Colorado, and was instrumental in passing any number of bills, both in the 2013 legislature, which implemented Amendment 64, and then I don't even know how many bills since then, but Dan did a lot of great service in government, and now has come over and is helping to do really awesome things. So congratulations on yesterday, Dan. I'd also add that 2 of the panelists are Colorado natives, in addition to myself. Chuck, you're the lone man out, being the Bama boy. But Ryan Brown next, CEO of Native Roots. How'd you spend your 420? Also Golden, Colorado native, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I did grow up in Golden. Yeah, 420 for us was perhaps a little bit less, I'd say like groundbreaking than for Dan. We kept our name, Native Roots Cannabis Company was survived the 420, but no, it was spent running around and helping to really just provide support to the myriad retail stores that we have kind of all across the Front Range, providing food, making sure that they have everything they need to be able to social distance, and also just thank them as well as customers for their desire to engage in commerce, but do so in a safe and respectful way that benefits both themselves, our staff. So it was a less eventful day, but it was nice to see that the sun was shining. There was people following the CDC guidelines and the shelter-in-place orders, largely just visiting essential businesses.
Great. Hey, Chuck, how about you? How was your 420?
Well, it could have been better, Christian. I had to cut my own hair, and you can see that I really am not very good at that. So that's a problem. Otherwise, it was fine. It was, as Ryan said, a little bit unusual from the standpoint I always enjoy getting out into the community, into visiting the dispensaries, supporting the bud tenders. We're an infused products manufacturer, so we don't have actual brick and mortar stores. We get to sell to everybody, and with that we go out and really spend a lot of time supporting our accounts and then their customers. So it was a little underwhelming from that perspective, but there were a lot of great things going on virtually, and people's enthusiasm for this industry continues to run high even in this tough time. So
Yep.
Look forward to next 420.
Yeah, and for those who don't know or who haven't been in Colorado for a year or more, 420 for the last, decade, or really since legalization in particular, it's really become the whole week. It's really 420 week, we call it. There was events, concerts, outdoor. There's the infamous or famous big smoke out on 420 at the Denver Civic Center Park. But more importantly, I think economically, we'd have hotels fill up all over the city and state for all these events. And again, it would be a week-long concerts at every venue, every night, all day, something was going on. So I'm curious, also it's a huge sales, we kind of see typically the way the cycle works is during the winter months, sales slow down a little bit, just in general for the products, but really starting in March and then into April, culminating really in the 420 week, we see huge sort of spikes in sales and revenues and other things. What do you guys, especially maybe Dan and Ryan, Chucky, you're a little bit more on the front end, but what are you might have heard the same thing, but I'm curious to hear, word there. I know we were encouraging people not to go to stores, and, usually there'd be lines on 420 at stores because people were, getting to the special deals or other things, or people were coming down. Obviously not what we were encouraging this year, but did you guys see any, did you guys have any promotions or anything, or to see any upticks or anything, or just any interesting observations?
Yeah, I can take that. I think this year compared to last year certainly was a different year in terms of sales, and that's to be expected. The individuals coming into the state through our airport, which is one of the biggest economic drivers in the state, certainly have dwindled significantly, which has impacted traffic to the state. But just in general, as people are just a little bit more cautious with their dollars, cautious with their movement, we definitely saw some decreased sales. We did largely try and focus our activities in communicating with customers to focus on how can we generate positivity for folks that are working on the front line, folks that are working in nonprofits. And if they're going to come and shop us, how do we make sure that they purchase really product that will last them a period of time, so that they're not having to visit stores on a regular basis and continue to follow shelter in place, obviously, but not expose themselves to unnecessary risks.
Yeah. No, I think it's been interesting. There was initially some stories about, huge amounts of sales. And really, like grocery stores and other things, people were stocking up on supplies in anticipation of, shutdowns or just not wanting to go out as much. So I think some of those initial reports, overall were that the cannabis industry in particular was seeing booming sales. My understanding from talking to most of the folks that we talk to and work with is that there was an initial bump, but that in general, overall sales are generally flat or down just over the last month or so. Again, probably to be expected. It's not, obviously we're not going down to zero, or some of the restaurants and bars that, all of us have friends who own or operate, or, are parts of different industry associations, but we're definitely lucky, but certainly not the boom times, I think, which we'll get into in a minute. I think we're a little bit overplayed, but curious, Dan or Chuck, if either of you guys have any thoughts on that part.
Yeah, so we have a number of marketplace partners that we talked with, and during our closing yesterday, in driving through and down to Pueblo, just drove by a number of different storefronts. It seemed like there was obviously nothing like a typical 420 lines, but there were lines. Sometimes those lines look a little longer when they're 6 feet, when everyone's got to stand 6 feet apart. But I think there was still some enthusiasm. I think folks are trying to find a sense of normalcy. And cannabis allows them to find that sense of normalcy, especially on 420. So I think there's still that desire. To the greater point, folks got stimulus checks last Friday, as late as last Friday. Whether or not, that helped, the industry sales, I think is yet to be seen. Data's probably still too early. I think across the marketplace, sales were slightly down year over year from last 420. but given the impact that the economy as a whole has undertaken, I think our, as far as yesterday and the weekend leading up, I think that the trend is the same, which in this environment is an uptick.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, one of the other classic conundrums of the cannabis industry is banking. And although in Colorado, there's a little bit of a misnomer, misunderstanding, most in Colorado, at least, we're lucky in that we have a number of banks that support the industry transparently. So we do have bank accounts, but what we don't have is generally access to using credit cards. So a lot of people right now that are out buying stuff, that are trying to hold on to cash because they might not be able to pay their rent or pay certain things with credit cards. I heard some interesting thoughts from some folks in the industry that were saying, we're trying to offer, credits or deals or just, help some people out, particularly patients, because they can't use credit cards, unfortunately. Maybe that's just more of a comment than anything else, but it's just one of those interesting parts of our industry that, the impacts of this will, as they linger over time, it'll be really interesting to see what happens. Hey, Chuck, I'm curious about, just what your experience is. Did you guys see this, as a supplier to other companies? A lot of what's happening just across all industries is we're seeing, people asking for different terms, and whereas before you deliver your goods and be paid for your goods, have you seen any shift as sort of on the wholesale side of this industry? Have you seen any shifts there in terms of how businesses are operating and reacting with each other?
Sure. Yeah, we did, Christian. I think we saw it in the beginning when sales spiked. We had a lot of accounts that were trying to really stock up, and that presented a decision for us too, because we wanted to be there and support those accounts. But we also were not sure whether at that time cannabis was going to be deemed essential or not. So I had to really restrict the flow of orders and allocate those orders. Not that we didn't have the product, but we didn't want to load up somebody else's warehouse and then all of a sudden the industry got closed and we were out both the goods and the ability to get paid. So there was a little bit of that decision making up front. And again, we had the best month that we've ever had in the month of March, but I knew that really was in anticipation of a big slowdown in April. So and that's what we've seen. I wouldn't say big slowdown, but we're certainly off probably about 20% from what we expected to be here in April. I think that what we're seeing today is that our strong accounts are still buying from us, but a lot of accounts are really slowing down their purchasing patterns because they too are hoarding cash. They're not sure exactly, we don't have access to lines of credit and things like that. So they're not sure exactly when the business is going to come back. So they're being more prudent and stockpiling cash. So we're more operating now more in a just-in-time type of a environment where we take small orders, deliver small orders, and then we just keep repeating that process as opposed to, some larger, more efficient orders that we would normally have.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I find it fascinating to talk to people about how they sort of reacted initially. It sounds like you made some thoughtful and smart decisions early on, thinking about, okay, if we overload someone, should we go to this more, just-in-time model? Curious, Ryan or Dan, if how did you guys initially react? When did you guys start looking at this and start thinking, this is going to be a significant challenge, and we're going to have to react? We'll get into, I think next we'll also, and we can also transition this now too, but just talking about, this was pre any of us understanding or knowing whether or not Colorado would have that sort of essential business status. But curious, just from like the very outset, when we started hearing about, possible closures or, social distancing at the very beginning there, how are your companies reacting to that?
Yeah, I think really early on, if I look back into the late February timeframe, we started to have a little bit of concern about what was going on, but it didn't feel so immediate. Probably for most, maybe for the truly prescient people out there. Like, they felt like this was going to be an issue that they needed to deal with in the coming week or 2 weeks. As the first week of March started to roll around, we had more and more dialogue internally, and we have some folks that are within our team that focus in on specifically employee health and safety, really like the environment, health and safety function. And that group started to convene our executive team, and then we got together a broader coalition of individuals that started to talk more specifically about the health impacts. When we started having those conversations, we started to reflect on the significant impact that this was likely to have to our business. So I think Chuck was really smart in how he approached making sure that customers weren't ultimately overstocked, and customers in this case being other retailers. Our approach was something similar, where we anticipated that just the risk was high, that business was going to be impacted negatively. And we didn't know, if we took examples at that time from Italy or Wuhan, China, we saw companies being effectively completely turned off in some of those markets with very little in the essential business designation. So we started to just be way more cautious with our outlay of funds and starting to ramp back some projects, just not knowing what the outcome was, which is a challenge. You know, it's to have no perspective as to how this thing is going to unfold at that time. And then do those activities in the face of growing sales for about a week it wasn't super popular, but it's something that I feel like now was, you know, cautious and probably appropriate. At the time, it to some felt a little crazy.
Yeah. Dan, you want to weigh in there?
Yeah. So, you know, a couple key dates stick in my mind. So bear in mind, we closed April 20th. Obviously, when you close a transaction, you're planning several weeks out. So, you know, we're watching, you know, sort of all these different indicators and press conferences, et cetera, and marching, you know, forward to close this first transaction, and also to do our brand launch. So we were in this very interesting space where there wasn't really ability to change our direction. It was just the pace at which we are going to proceed. And so, you know, March the 12th, I think it was a pretty clear date for all of us when the, you know, president declared a national state of emergency. I think that obviously was a big one. Just, you know, from you know, there was talk about, you know, domestic airline, domestic travel being halted. You know, we were getting ready. Personally, I was getting ready to take the kids up skiing for the week for spring break, which seems, you know, like eons ago, but that was the plan. And sure enough, we canceled that trip, much to my disappointment. My wife is a much more conservative, thoughtful person than I am. So I said, let's just do it. And sure enough, they closed the mountain on Sunday. So from a, you know, just from a very specific date set, those were important ones, you know, because we have some market affiliates in the mountains and in Aspen. And those were some of the hardest hit, you know, early on. And then March 27th, which is another Friday afternoon, we were waiting for a local approval from Pueblo County, which was the last local approval we needed before we could close our transaction, which was scheduled for the 15th at that time. The close was scheduled for the 15th. The local approval the meeting was scheduled for April 13th. And on March 27th, we were told that the Pueblo County meeting was going to be canceled and moved to May 11th. And so, you know, we were at a point where we needed to make a decision about, you know, moving forward. And, you know, credit to the county commissioners for trying to find a way through that process to allow that local approval to go forward. But I think it's a testament to not only the nimbleness of the industry and the folks involved, but also the multiple regulators and regulations that we've got to work with in any given week or day, as it may be. When we had that flood of different and competing executive orders and MED guidance, and things seem to be in conflict, and there was a lot of definitely a lot of points along the way where not necessarily from an economic point of view purely, but just more of a how do we keep our workers safe, and how do we act as an essential business during this time, given a multitude of direction from all over the place.
Yeah, and for those listening or watching, obviously we have a complicated set of rules and regulations here in Colorado. Requires state and local licenses, and when you're doing these complicated transactions like Dan's referring to, the state is one thing, but the locals are an entirely different animal because there's different systems in place. And what, that's not a criticism. It's just every local government has their own specific needs, and it's it creates unique challenges. I'm curious. You mentioned the essential business thing, and Nevada, for example, went to a delivery only model. In Massachusetts, it's been widely, at least understood in the industry, that Massachusetts actually decided to not deem recreational cannabis sales an essential industry. Interestingly, they did keep alcohol sales as an essential industry that kept open. And a quick aside, my law firm sued the governor of Massachusetts for shutting them down. And their principal argument, which for the lawyers listening, it had to survive a rational basis test, which just means they have to show that there is a rational basis for them to do one thing to make these types of decisions. But one of their principal arguments was that you can die from withdrawal from alcohol, but you can't die from withdrawal from marijuana. So an interesting argument that sort of validates what we've all known and have been saying for years. But that argument actually was one of the reasons that carried the day, and recreational stores remain closed in Massachusetts. It's very, very challenging on those businesses. Leadership in Colorado, though, went a different direction. Credit to Ian Sieb in the governor's office, and just the governor's thoughtfulness, who I think in general has handled this very, very well and very admirably. I'm very proud of our state and how we've handled this. But curious how you guys have worked through this. We had a curbside model for a little bit there, and now which we were able to keep open, but we were doing deliveries from the curbside. But just curious your guys' perspective on how things are going, and any thoughts you might have on how the state's handled this from the start, now that we are deemed essential businesses and we are able to stay open.
I'll jump in because I probably have less to contribute on this than the guys with actual storefronts. But it's been interesting for us as a wholesale manufacturer, because a lot of our capability, other than our brand portfolio, which people really like and gravitate to, it's really our sales team who are out in the stores, with their relationships with the purchasing managers or the general managers or the bud tenders, and then our brand ambassadors and other support team, which are out doing education, pop-ups, other kind of promotional work for the benefit of the patients or the consumers. So having that cut off really has caused us to have to figure out a different way to do business. Additionally, we're all about branding and marketing inside the store. And if the patient or the consumer really can't get into the store, a la the curbside, or even if they can, they're only allowed to get into the kind of the front part because they're controlling the amount of people and the flow, then there's really no ability for them to interact with our brand. They basically are interacting with the bud tender and saying, I want this because I've had it before, or the bud tenders by selling them something based on, you know, how they've described what they want to solve for. So it's really presented challenges to us as a marketing and branding company of, you know, how do we keep getting the word out? How do we keep building our relationships? And obviously at the end of the day, it's all about sales and revenue, and how do we keep that coming in? So I have appreciated our partners, our customer partners out there that have worked with us to find creative ways to continue to work with the end consumer.
Great. Ryan, how's it been going for you guys?
Yeah, you know, without sounding too flapped by this whole experience, I would say it was pretty chaotic for a period of time. I think anybody that sort of has been operating in this industry during really from, I think, like the 14th or 13th to 14th through, you know, the end of March and into April, they experienced a tremendous amount of change, especially at the retail level, where effectively we had a new set of rules or a modification or a clarification to conflicting rules coming out more or less every other day. So what we ended up doing is we would have a team that would meet every day to go through before the stores would open and make sure that we understood what our operating practices had to look like for the day based on what had been issued the following evening that was to be implemented that morning. And it meant that, you know, for us, more than 200 200 retail staff would have to change their operating approach from one day to the next. And in particular, the transition to the curbside model was very impactful and required quite a bit more work to reformat how that was going to work, be safe, since there's individuals handling cash that to us is somewhat of a risky activity. And so finding a way to do that as safe as possible was a serious need. That all said, very much appreciate the governor's office, the governor, ENC, you know, that team for trying to work with the industry to identify ways to service and serve the community that seeks us for wellness and relief products. I think we saw from the brief shutdown or potential shutdown of adult use stores in Denver that there was a significant demand and a huge number of individuals that were going to really flood into the marketplace and really conflicted with the purpose and intent that I think everybody was shooting for. So it's been chaotic, but I think at this point now we feel like we're in a flow. We have our operating procedures. We've been working with law enforcement regulators, as well as the governor's office regularly, as have everybody on this call, to make sure that we're, you know, operating the best way possible and doing it in a meaningful way to protect the safety of the public health environment in which we engage.
Yeah. And Dan, I might amend the question a little bit for you, because I'd love to hear what you guys are doing, but also, you know, Chuck touched on, you know, sort of branding and marketing. How interesting time to be launching a new brand in this environment. And I'm curious what sort of adjustments to your guys' strategy you've made, but also would just love to hear how, you know, your perspective as a former legislator that knows this stuff inside and out on sort of how the states and local governments have been handling things.
Yeah, may you live in interesting times has been a admonition that we have taken seriously, and it was one of those things where like Ryan alluded to, and Chuck, I mean, it's the frontline people you got to give a lot of credit to for being flexible, for having good attitudes when they've got to engage with your customers and still have a smile on their face when they're doing their sale. And I think the brand launch was a test and a testament of, I think Schwaz's ability to weather, this experience. And just as an example, even though we knew that the Pueblo County hearing was delayed until May 11th, nothing changed on our closing schedule in our calendars. And so I went, of course, to the CEO and said, nothing here has changed. And he said, that's right. We're going to stick to the plan. And you and, other folks need to figure out how you're going to weather this. And, so I think, part of it was just sheer grit and determination to make something happen. And then, having your birthday be 420, as we will forever know Schwaz, was something special, and we didn't want to let that event pass us by. So there was something meaningful and historical to that date, that we were definitely ready to do whatever we could to meet that target. From a governmental response point of view, having been in those decisions behind those closed doors, I would say that the response has been phenomenal. And it's a testament to the communication that is going on behind those closed doors, that folks are talking to each other. And frankly, you can tell when the communication breaks down too. And I think, as long as we continue to be open and transparent with each other, industry to the regulators to the governor, to the locals, et cetera, I think we can do well in this. It's certainly going to be absolutely critical as we do the economic recovery. As part of this, some of the things we think about in this next phase, depending on what happens, from an economic point of view, is how do we help, our workers? How do we help our employees stay safe and continue to be able to perform, as well as those who are going to lose their jobs and not going to be able to go back to work at all? And what does that mean for them, and how do we help them? Christian, you alluded to banking earlier, and one of the things that came up, very unrelated in some ways to COVID, but somewhat directly related. One of our employees had closed up their. They had a brewery that they had opened as part of an enterprise, and we knew about it. And because of the pandemic, in part, they decided to shutter its doors and put the brewery in a corporate bankruptcy. Well, long story short, the employee was a personal guarantor on a couple of the leases for the equipment and the lease itself, and was looking at needing to file a personal bankruptcy. And his bankruptcy attorney said to him, you need to be mindful of who your employer is. And if it's Medicine Man Technologies, you may actually become ineligible to file bankruptcy, which is a travesty, would have impacted his livelihood, his family, everything. He was trying to do the right thing by shuttering the brewery, but this was impacting his entire livelihood. And because he wanted to be, he was very concerned with that. He actually resigned from his employment so that when he filed personal bankruptcy, he would not have our branding associated with it. So, it is something that we all know, and it's one thing to talk about it in the abstract, but for those of us who are on the front lines dealing with our employees and our customers, we know that cannabis is treated very differently and puts folks in a very, very much in harm's way, even in a spiraling economic crisis.
Yeah, and we're definitely gonna speak, I think, quite a bit more about what's happening at the federal level, which includes bankruptcy considerations, but also PPP and all the different programs that are being set up into economic recovery. But you mentioned, employees, and I know it's a a tricky thing to talk about, and it's a difficult thing to talk about. So, we can talk more in the abstract, but I am curious about your guys' perspective on, what you're seeing in the labor force. I've spoken to a number of clients in different states around the country, Colorado included, and they have had some challenges in terms of people, unfortunately, people do get sick, or people they have perhaps compromised immunity or other pre-existing conditions. So they're hesitant to be in an environment where, even if it is an essential business, being at work. And just curious about just overall what the sort of labor force impact has been. And again, I'll just preface that by saying we, unfortunately, as an industry as a whole, do not currently have access to the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Relief, that many people have now infamously taken advantage of, or I think a lot of people have been helped, but there's been the stories about Harvard University and Ruth Chris and other places. We don't have any access to that. So how is it impacting your guys' labor force? Speak as specifically or generally as you like, understanding these are very sensitive issues.
Sure.
Yeah. Sorry to
Go
cut
ahead,
you,
Brian.
Chuck. I was going to say, I think it's probably, unfortunately, it's probably a rare company in cannabis today that has not experienced some impact in their labor force. And unfortunately, we are no different. We've had to adjust the size of our labor force to sort of meet the current environment of sales, not really knowing what the future looks like in terms of the longevity of this crisis. And that's one of the most challenging decisions to do as a leader, just in general. And it's also one of the key things at some times, exhausting all other options, that is necessary to just really protect the longevity and the sustainability of hundreds of other jobs in our case. And I think that everybody is being forced to make some of those decisions in real time with very limited information. Going back to I heard an interview with, or one of the public conversations with the governor, and he was asked, do you think that you're going to look at this situation and realize that you made, this, that, or the other decision wrong? You closed the economy too long, or you didn't close it soon enough, or whatever. And he's like, no, these are, I'm using the available information I have at the time. And I think that we're all sort of struggling with that same situation. We have limited understanding for how long this crisis will last, the best intentions for our organization and our employees in mind, to be able to weather a significant storm. I've seen and heard anecdotally that most organizations have been impacted in the labor force.
Yeah. Chuck, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, first of all, it is a travesty and a shame that we're all going through this without kind of the hope of a little bit of a safety net for our employees or our companies, because we are soldiering on here, and don't have some of the support that we normally would, and so it makes those decisions even harder for us. If we knew that people were going to be able to get payroll protection, it'd be easier to keep more folks on. From our standpoint, we've had to make some adjustments. I like the elegant way that Ryan put that, adjustments, and we've had to go through that decision-making process. We've also had some attrition too, where employees either are nervous or they've fortunately, knock on wood, we have not had a single case of COVID in any of our facilities or any of our employees, but we have had people who've had family members that were sick, and so we've asked them to stay home, or they voluntarily have, again with the idea of keeping everybody as safe as possible throughout this time. One of the interesting things that it will be interesting to see as we start to try and come back from this. We don't get to just kind of go down to the labor hall, so to speak, or put an ad in the newspaper and hire people and have a whole bunch of candidates, and we can kind of just pick the best one that day. we actually have to have people that have gone through a vetting process with the MED and have a badge and are, have passed the level of qualification that frankly is harder than most people that apply for jobs in general. And so our labor pool and our ability to hire is going to be a bit constrained too. Now, I imagine there'll be a lot more people applying for MED badges going forward, because there'll be a lot more people looking for work. And so that ultimately could be a good thing for us in the industry. But it's just not as easy as putting out a help wanted sign when we need to add some more folks.
Yeah. That's interesting. One of the things that the state did do, which I thought was really interesting, and whether or not it actually, moves the dial for any of the folks involved, was to take all of the people that have gaming licenses. So a number of folks in the, limited gaming, we have, mostly Blackhawk, Central City, there's some very limited places, but a lot of these people, those places were completely shut down, and the state said, okay, these people have been vetted, so they should be able to transition easily. In addition, I think there's just some interesting opportunities there to talk to some people who have some interesting skill sets and customer service, but also, they've been vetted. I think that the state has indicated that they're keeping their badge background check offices open, and they're going to continue to process those as quickly as they can. But yeah, it will be interesting to see if people, as they sort of transition from one career to another, or sort of one industry to another, they see the cannabis industry is still open. It'll really be interesting to see sort of how that evolves over time. But it's we just so law firms too. We are included in those people that cannot apply for these loans, at least technically, in that it specifically says if you receive any revenue from the federal government, from the cannabis industry, that you're not eligible. There's always a lot of different interpretations, and hopefully some changes that are on the horizon, or at least some policy changes over the medium term through the economic recovery that might help us. But I commend all you guys, because it's been a difficult, it's really difficult to make these decisions, and no one, you've built a family. All of your guys, all three of your companies, I know specifically have really strong cultures, and have some really good people that have been there for a long time. And yeah, it's tough. We're faced with these challenges too, because, Ryan, you mentioned you slowed down deals, and, you kind of decided where you should spend your money. Obviously, law firms are not the first place people are spending their monies. And when those deals slow down, that definitely impacts, the business of law. And I think there's a lot of folks, we talk about how for every job created by a licensed business in Colorado, you look at the multiplier effect, there's 2 to 3 jobs that are created ancillary to the industry. Now, obviously the sandwich shop across the street from, your cultivation facility, that, they're probably not going to be disqualified from using PPP, but all the accountants, the marketing companies, the lawyers, a lot of these sort of support industries, all the software companies, they're facing these same headwinds. And, the political statement I'll make is that it's just really disappointing at a time when really what we're trying to accomplish is just keeping people in their jobs. It's unfortunate that this sort of this morality and this dichotomy of, legal federally, illegal under state law, but illegal federally, at the end of the day, it's just going to impact, it's impacting real people. We have, the 100 or so people, about 100 people in our firm, and then all their families. Just like you guys, they're, we support them, and they're a part of our team. And it's been, it's just a really challenging time. So commend you guys for doing what you're doing. But Dan, I don't know if I gave you a chance, if you wanted to add anything, sort of what you guys, from a labor force perspective, you guys are obviously in, acquisitions and doing things, that I'm curious what your experience has been.
Yeah. So we've picked an interesting time to go into a growth acquisition phase, but we think, there's as much opportunity as there's ever been. From a employee point of view. So we have a hydroponic store as well, Big Tomato, that has seen record sales over the last quarter and a half because of folks just concerned with losing their access to nutrients and other equipment that helps them grow. So we've had to put in safe social distancing, protective gear, masks, gloves, etc. And just like anything else, it's keeping up the morale of folks who are putting themselves in harm's way. I mean, just because of the data and the information that's still being collected, we are trying to be sensitive to their needs. So I think like Chuck and Ryan, we've had some folks say, I'm taking care of someone elderly and I can't be exposed to my household. We've been accommodating to that. We've had folks who have been really just concerned with customer engagement and what that means for their safety. And so we've just had to try to work through the different scenarios and just take a very human approach to this episode, knowing again, to everyone's point, using whatever information we have available to us to make the best decisions and hoping that those decisions carry the day. So we give our employees an update every other day as to what a new executive order or Denver authority came down, or even other local localities, just so they know that we're paying attention to the things they are. And I think that the lesson here that we've learned is over communicating in this time has helped us tremendously. We do virtual coffee chats with our executive team during the week. We'll do a happy hour after hours, and folks are joining in large numbers because they want to connect, they want to find out what's going on, and they want to be heard and seen, and so I think it's helped us from a culture point of view to really lean in and squeeze our family harder than we would before, even if it's virtually. We still we had our first, not only do we have our first publicly traded closing yesterday, it's probably the first virtual closing, cannabis closing of its kind. So we're just trying to adjust with what we can and share with the employees that, hey guys, we're all in this together, and if we're not going to ask you to do anything we wouldn't do. So and just keeping up the morale on that front has been probably our most important task. And knock on wood, we haven't had a COVID case yet, but depending on how things go, it's probably going to be an inevitability for all of us, including those of us on this call. So we'll just have to weather the storm as it comes.
Yeah. We're doing similar things. I've got a coffee talk this afternoon, actually. Funny you should mention it, with some of our staff, and obviously using video conferencing has been helpful, but just a particular challenge when you're a retail business, because you're consumer facing, and there's many jobs that you guys, many of your employees just simply, it's very difficult to do virtually, if not impossible. Mm-hmm. So it's a particular challenge. Obviously, I want to be sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of retail establishments that, clothing stores, all sorts of, people that have retail stores that's just not an option yet. We'll see how as we move to a stay in your home kind of environment, to the safer from home model that Governor Polis here is predicting and other governors have been talking about. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves. And frankly, I think there's a lot that can be learned from the cannabis industry as we've managed through this. Maybe we can help some of our retail friends. And I already know a couple of retail folks that are asking me about how are people keeping their folks safe. So something to put a pin in for you guys to think about how we can support other folks as they come back to operate safely. And that's, I kind of want to, at the top of the hour here, kind of shift to this the positive things that I've been hearing about folks in the cannabis industry are doing to help their communities, not just their employees, but their patients, their customers, and also just, other folks in the community. Curious if you guys have heard of any of these things. I know, one of the things I've heard from a number of people, California, Colorado, Massachusetts, all of those places, the folks have shifted their manufacturing facilities to making some hand sanitizer. It's one of those things that was a hot topic a month or so ago when there was the run on hand sanitizer. I thought that was just a cool thing that happened. And then, we've also seen a cool program called Friends in Weed that a number of Colorado businesses are participating in. And the Friends in Weed program, they're buying gift certificates to local restaurants and using that to give to bud tenders and other folks. And really the goal is just to support local restaurants in this time of need. But curious if you guys have had anything you guys are doing as companies or cool things you've seen that we can help spread the word on here.
Yeah, I'd say the industry itself it's needed to, but it also just by its nature has been such a community engaged industry forever, with businesses identifying, having nonprofit partners, really being very mission based, and making sure that they're deeply, deeply engaged in the community. And, even like working with Dan back in the day and figuring out how to do those things up in the Highlands community and others, like that was something that was, needed and so key to being able to operate in this business. And it's a business also where for a long time, maybe less so now, there was some real discomfort around coming and purchasing cannabis, and the need for businesses to show up with a face of support, wellness, and relief has been embedded into the DNA of the industry, in my perspective. I mean, we've seen all sorts of amazing examples from different companies that are all also dealing with the same challenges, we're all dealing with, which is probably decreased revenues to some degree at a minimum, a challenged environment where your operations are changing on a daily basis, and the ability to then say, okay, we still are a critical part of this community, and how do we provide benefit because we're open or because we have this, that, or the other facility capability. For us, we started quickly manufacturing cleaning solution and distributing that all across the state to all of our operations. We purchased washable masks for all of our staff as fast as we reasonably could, and are donating the rest of those to frontline, healthcare workers. We have just started donating hundreds and hundreds of units of CBD product. Juana's actually been, a good friend of ours for a little while on the CBD side, and they also donated some to us to donate to both our staff as well as to contribute to that effort too. So that's been amazing. And, we're exploring all sorts of other ways to provide benefit to the community, including providing a dual benefit, having masks available at our retail store that people can purchase and have all proceeds of those effectively go to benefit the frontline workers and healthcare community that really just desperately needs both dollars as well as folks to support them.
Cool.
I think the industry also, Christian, has come together under Colorado Cannabis Cares to really promote the collection and donation of funds to Help Colorado Now, which was set up to really respond at the state level to this crisis. So it is good, as Ryan said, we've always been a tight-knit community, and it's good to see us even getting tighter in the face of this kind of unprecedented event. And really the outpouring of people's generosity to really give back. You could look at, could look at the industry and say, geez, we don't get much from others, so why do we want to give back? But the reality is that's in our core and our DNA from the beginning, of just being open and wanting to be inclusive, even in those times when we weren't included. So I'm really proud of the industry for what it's doing to step up. that way.
Would you mind expanding just a little bit on Colorado Cannabis Cares, Chuck? Just sort of, if anyone's watching and is curious about it, we'll do a shameless pitch because I think it's a really awesome thing that Chuck's been working on it.
Yeah, it's really an industry group that was born out of Colorado Leeds, which many of us are members of Colorado Leeds, as well as MIG, Marijuana Industry Group, and others that have really banded together to raise money that really is then directed specifically to the COVID-19 help, if you will, or organization, Help Colorado Now, that's really focused on providing support and assistance to those with suffering from the effects of COVID-19, or people that are laid off and need additional support and assistance. I'll do a special shout out to Good Chemistry that donated $50,000 to Colorado Cannabis Cares, and really stepped up. I think we're close to $100,000 that the industry has generated in donations so far through our organization. So
that's awesome. Thanks for doing that, Chuck.
Sure.
Dan, did you want to jump in?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think our the need has continued to grow. Every day that we're experiencing this, and I think more and more folks are coming out of the shadows as to who's really servicing our economy, and who's on the front lines. And I'm not talking about cannabis really. I'm just talking about cleaning staff and folks who are really putting themselves out there to make sure that we're safe. So we're putting together some plans to kind of recognize the kind of what we're calling a community cleaning effort. So folks have the know that they're being supported and recognized. And it's one of the challenges that I think all of us have in this is that there's so many opportunities to give and to share in that giving publicly. We've been a little bit more inward and focused kind of more on our local, at a local level. And much to the chagrin of our PR folks, I think it's one of those measures where we're just, again, we're launching a new brand, but part of that brand is a community platform. And I think we have a committee, we call it Call True. It's culture, but it's Call True. How do we remain true to our culture? And I think a lot of folks who again are frontline employees are saying, let's do things a little bit more subtly, and know that we're getting need where we think it's most needed, and it's being directed largely from the employee level. So I think eventually as we get our legs underneath us a little bit more, we'll be more public about some of our giving efforts, but it's definitely on our radar screen and in our budget and our pocketbooks. And we're again we're thinking about the long term here. So it's kind of like volunteering in the holidays or Thanksgiving. Everyone does it on that one day, and then they think they've done it for the year. We're trying to think about, okay, what happens in 3 months when there are folks still struggling to get ahead. And we're also doing some individual efforts. So one of the things I recently got involved in with the Colorado Bar Association was just a tenant eviction sort of process, where there's a lot of tenants who are being have rent due and just can't pay it because they're out of work. And so I've been working with landlords to give the tenants some leniency on that. So very individual efforts at this point, but still trying to make an impact as much as we can with everything going on.
That's great. I want to also give a shout out. There's Cannabis Doing Good Gives, and just a bunch of other really cool programs that are just doing all cannabis companies supporting frontline health workers, you know, homeless people experiencing homelessness. It's just really been it's been very heartening to see. I know it's just such a difficult time, but to see the generosity of so many different folks, yeah, I think it's a testament to sort of the overall culture of the industry, which we should stay true to. Dan, to your, I like that, I like your guys' culture concept. So yeah, now, you know, I'd like to shift, you know, in terms of, you know, those are the things that you guys and others are focusing on doing, you know, really for the community and others. But I'm curious what your guys' perspective is on the things you know, state and federal government could actually do for us. And, you know, I think we do need to talk a little bit about sort of PPP and disaster relief funds and those types of things. And I might be able to provide a little bit of an interesting update of some stuff happening at the federal government. But just really curious, you know, is there things that you think, and you know, it's difficult to say, to ask for more, right? But is there anything either legislatively or, you know, things that at the state level could be done? That's one question. And the second would be, you know, at the federal level, the obvious one for me is that just give cannabis companies access to PPP funds while they're still there, or just incorporate us into the recovery bills that will be coming, that the president's spoken about, you know, the next round of economic recovery. Curious, you know, either at the state level, legislatively, federal level, what you guys are thinking.
You know, I'll jump in, and it's a very cost-free solution, which is, you know, there are a lot of, you know, some anti-cannabis, you know, friendly either, you know, jurisdictions or folks who want to sort of stop growth of the industry, whether that means stopping licenses from, you know, expanding in a certain jurisdiction, and I'm not going to name specifics right now, but or just not allowing expansion of licensed premises, things like that. And what I would say is a very easy stimulus, which would benefit everyone, is just to allow the industry to continue to grow and thrive and not try to take us backwards. You know, this is going to be a very unfettered and untethered tax dollars that are going to continue to flow. You know, and it just as an example, the state is going to get, for the first time in a long time, a new updated budget figures showing the impact of COVID to state income tax dollars, sales tax dollars, et cetera. And the state is going to have to completely revamp its budget. Cannabis tax dollars are, you know, a regular source for many of these jurisdictions. And what we would say is we're happy to pay our fair share towards that. And so just allowing business as usual, which again this isn't a big ask or a big, you know, monumental change, but just allowing things to happen as they normally did will benefit these local jurisdictions and the state tremendously in contributing to their to its economic effort.
Yeah. Chuck or Ryan, you want to go ahead, Chuck?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I mean, I think that the unfortunate circumstance is that we are caught up in a little bit of politics here, because any rational person would look at the amount of taxes that we pay at the federal level, which is, you know, 2 to 4 times more than most normal corporations, and the number of people that we employ federally, which is, last estimate I heard was in excess of 350,000 people. And you would say, well, how would somebody that's paying that much taxes and employ that many people not be eligible for federal stimulus? So this is purely a political situation. It would be very easy to incorporate our legally licensed, state-based licensed companies under a stimulus program and not be worried about providing and diverting some of this stimulus money to illegal operators. So I don't take that as an argument at all. And, I think, which is, probably something we'll talk about toward the end of this and forward looking, but, the history shows us that, at the end of the Great Depression, alcohol prohibition was lifted, and part of that reason was to generate tax revenue that the country desperately needed, and also to put people back to work. So, I'm optimistic maybe the pain and suffering we're going through now will turn into something good here in short order. But, we just put our heads down and try and focus on what we can do to keep our employees safe and keep the doors open. And hopefully the legislators will see the light and provide some support to our companies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, and without duplicating everything that Chuck and Dan said, agreed with both of them on the federal level, especially. I think that those are no-brainer considerations that I'm hopeful are meaningfully being considered. And Christian, I know you're quite involved in some of those conversations too. At the local level, like Dan, I think that this is for communities that have been reticent potentially to enable, let's say, retail cannabis or other types of cannabis establishments. I think coming out of this, there is very much the need to both, gainfully employ individuals throughout the state, generate real tax dollars, and provide a meaningful and more stable community situation all across the state and beyond. I think every state's kind of going to deal with the same situation. And I think cannabis is excited to be a friend in helping to rebuild communities, which are going to be desperately in need depending upon how long the situation lasts. My hope too is that this, as the budget deficit does absolutely grow, which I think we're all anticipating, that this doesn't become a situation where the means to get through the budget crisis is to just massively increase the existing taxes. And while, of course, the industry is very open to pay the fair share of taxes in operating our businesses, for sure, we do also want to make sure that people don't go back to the unregulated market, finding other means to get cannabis outside of regulated, safe, controlled, taxed businesses. And then, a few things that I would note too, I think that the emergency or executive orders that have been issued at the state level to enable the businesses to operate in a slightly more diverse way, being able to really do online sales and find other ways that are, let's say, lower touch, and eventually touchless, with things like online payments coming hopefully to fruition in this time frame. I think those are good changes and provide a little bit more stability and safety for both our staff and the customers, and something that I would definitely advocate that we extend. And I would note too, like every industry, we are open and we are very thankful for that. We're also going to be economically impacted and would love to have access to the same types of programs that effectively every other business does at the state or at the federal level.
Yeah. No, those are all great thoughts. And to your last point, Brian, I've gotten a couple of questions from the folks that are listening. So if anyone does want to ask questions, there is a Q&A button you can click. The question was the first question was just, has there been any legislative conversations or changes as a result of COVID-19? I'm thinking mainly of delivery because of the vulnerable customers who need our service. And then the second part of that question is, are there any legislative conversations focused on equity? So for the first part, I think maybe I'll just give a little bit of update on like this delivery conversation. So it's interesting. Delivery is something that a law did pass in Colorado. Medical marijuana delivery was allowed as of January 1st of this year. Adult use delivery starts January 1st of next year, 2021. And, initially there were definitely some conversations, some folks who thought maybe delivery was, a good thing to take a hard look at right now. The way it works is, local government, our state has a long history of local governments really having a say in how business operations occur. So that was included in the law that just passed. And I know, Ryan, at least I think you guys have some delivery operations running in some cities around Colorado. A lot of Colorado cities haven't moved forward with this, and honestly, some of the pushback on this was, even though on its face it sounds okay, delivery could be a good thing, because that's how a lot of people are receiving everything right now. But there is, in Nevada, for example, they went to a delivery only model, which meant they shut down a lot of the retail stores. And what that ended up honestly doing, at least, anecdotally, if not, and it's hard to get all the information until you do a full debrief when this is all done. But by shutting down the stores, you actually reduced access to people, because they just, people don't have, you can't turn from being a really good pizza parlor into Domino's overnight, right? There's whole different logistics setups for these types of businesses. So although it's something that, it's something that a bunch of us are talking about and just saying, look, let's think about what are the things that we can all agree on that might make sense in the medium term if there needs to be some adjustments towards delivery. The initial sort of interest in that, in particular, as we've managed to get through this pretty successfully here in Colorado. I think it's been, it's not been put on a back burner, I would say, but it's a discussion that's happening, but it's certainly not a priority, would be my sort of answer to that question. But Ryan, I'm curious if you have any just additional insights. You guys have stood up a delivery operation relatively recently, I think, right?
Yeah, no, we absolutely have. And my guess is, everybody else in this panel also has a very good perspective on this. But with the need for local approval for additional delivery jurisdictions, right now the two jurisdictions that enable delivery are effectively Boulder and Superior, and they allow delivery for patients that are Native Roots patients. So have signed their plant count over to Native Roots, and we're able to deliver to those. And that's effectively the extent of the population that we can service today. We do think it's a good extension to the business, maybe not the only aspect of the business, for all the reasons that you kind of talked about, Christian. There's absolutely vulnerable populations, immunocompromised individuals that just really reasonably can't get to the store, or can't easily get to the store, and in this circumstance are finding it even more challenging or more risky potentially. So we would definitely encourage those conversations to take place. Very much understand that most legislatures that we speak with locally are otherwise occupied. It's something that they view as an important thing to think about and to move forward on. And unfortunately, it's on the list. It's just maybe not the most immediate thing and most pressing discussions to be having.
Yeah. Well, maybe that allows us, I know Denver has been talking about incorporating, this is the second part of that question, incorporating, this was before all of this, but I don't think it's changed, incorporating some of the equity discussion into this too. In Massachusetts, for example, you saw their delivery program. They really wanted to empower, smaller businesses and people that have been disproportionately impacted, by cannabis prohibition, to be able to participate in the industry. I know that's something Denver was looking at, but just in terms of equity generally, the question is just, are there legislative conversations on equity? My short answer would be yes. And, obviously the legislature is incredibly distracted right now with what we have right in front of us in terms of the larger COVID-19 problem. But I would say that just I see all legislation, at least in Colorado and probably nationally, I mean, there's just a renewed focus on how do we keep diversity, equity, inclusion in the front of our minds as we do this, right? So any thoughts there, guys? We don't have to dive too deeply into that if you don't have any thoughts on it, but I know all of your companies are actually specifically working on larger diversity, equity, inclusion, projects.
Yeah, I think, we're definitely working on that at, kind of at the national industry level through Cannabis Trade Federation and some of the diversity task force that's part of that. I do think it's got to be top of mind. It has been top of mind, and it should continue to be a driving force. I think that the challenge that everybody's going to have is the competing priorities of making sure that you have the proper diverse and inclusive workforce and infrastructure, balancing that with we're just trying to keep the doors open right now, right? We're trying to keep as many people employed and try to get through this situation in a way that we do ultimately still have not only healthy businesses, but a platform to be able to continue to expand and do this good work, like equality and diversity. So I know it's coming, and I know it's something that we have to be focused on. I just think that we're going to be faced with some competing priorities here over the next few months to the rest of the year.
Yeah. Dan, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think diversity, equity, inclusion begins at home, and that's the sort of approach Schwaz has taken. So, as part of our culture club, we have a DEI initiative out of that, and I think we're looking at education piece. We're looking at we're participating in the expungement efforts going on at the state level. We think that's an important priority. But equity and inclusion means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So you kind of have to put some definition around that. For some it means having someone from a disadvantaged group become a license owner and have access to a license, which is a tremendous responsibility for all of us. And so how the state or local governments figure that out, given this market that I can tell you is severely capitally constrained. Most of the loans, most of the folks who've been able to succeed in this business have gotten loans from friends and family, and taken that investment that way. There's no SBA loans that would traditionally be allowed, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we're definitely committed to figuring out a way to find balance in the diversity and equity approach. One of the things that I've said publicly quite often is, Colorado never really got any real recognition or credit for it. But the reason that Colorado's diversity efforts have been wildly more successful than Massachusetts, and even though they've got a very robust initiative in place, is because Colorado had a very egalitarian way of awarding licenses at the front end, meaning mom and pops and anyone who met the background requirements and could pay the licensing fee could get a license. Unlike many of these other jurisdictions that have caps and specific capital equity requirements before you can even show up to fill out the application, Colorado took a very a small business friendly approach, and I think it has equated to a number of number of women owners, number of African American, Latino owners of businesses that you just don't see elsewhere. But because we never, we didn't do a good job branding it. I'll blame Christian for that. We just thought it was the right thing to do, and it turned out pretty well. But now that we're going on a second round or third round of this, we have to, we always want to make sure that there is balance and equity and inclusion. It's just finding the right way to do that allows folks to succeed. And again, operating a cannabis business regardless of a global pandemic is tough. Now it's just that much more challenging.
Well, I think, to your point, and this is all, I'll use this to segue also to talk more specifically about the federal PPP loans, but you brought it up, Dan. I think it's really important. We just don't have, not only do we not have access to the PPP or the disaster relief the PPP loans, which you can pay up to 2.5 months of your employees' salaries. If you have under 500 employees, you can get 2.5 months up to $10 million. And there's some caps in there and it's hard to calculate, but not only do we not have access to those, we also do not have access to the disaster relief funds, which are just lower interest or no interest loans. The PPP loans get completely forgiven if you keep your workforce in place. The disaster relief is a little bit different, but just in general, we don't have access to SBA loans, or frankly, we don't have access to banking loans generally. So when you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and providing opportunities in the more traditional way, that opportunities have been provided historically through the SBA, or loans that are focused on minority-owned businesses, female-owned businesses. We don't have access to any of that as an industry, and frankly, not just as an industry, but as an ancillary business industry, right? So people that want to start up companies to support those companies that are in the licensed business part of the industry. So that is a real challenge. The one positive thing I would say is that this conversation has been accelerated over the last couple weeks in terms of just talking to members of our federal delegation, but also folks on the relevant committees. Jason Crow, who's a congressman from Colorado, made quasi-famous by his role as one of the folks that were in the impeachment hearings. You saw Jason. It was the hometown person doing a lot of the questioning in the Senate hearing, or the Senate trial, which was really interesting. But Jason's also on the Small Business Administration, the committee that's the Small Business Administration Committee. And he's been pushing, along with Governor Polis, wrote a letter that many of you probably saw to encourage the federal government to include in this round of PPP, allowing cannabis businesses and ancillary businesses to participate in that. Congressman Blumenauer from Oregon actually is introducing a standalone bill today, is what I've heard. This is in preparation for hopefully trying to push for this in the subsequent rounds of PPP funding, or in the any recovery bills that come out of the federal Congress. This is designed to be inclusive of cannabis businesses. And again, for any of those people who talk to anyone that they know about this, or, there's a lot of people say, cannabis is a controversial thing. In reality, it's actually not that. It's one of the least controversial political things. It just, it's controversial because there's loud voices on the other side in particular right now. But what's not controversial is that these are real jobs, and that go see Ryan's facilities or Dan's facility, or any of these guys' facilities or anyone's facilities. These are real jobs, and unfortunately, you have to go to a job. It's not like working at the Willy Wonka chocolate factory, Chuck, at your guy's spot. It's actually it's a very nice place, but these are people, right? People punch their clocks and they're working really hard, and you guys are paying all the payroll coverage, the unemployment insurance, and everything else. So it is really, I don't know why it's controversial that, those are not the types of jobs that we want people to have at a time like now. And I'll get off my soapbox in a second here, but right now what we want is to keep people in their jobs, period. And focus on, when there is a recovery, getting those jobs back as quickly as possible. So I commend, Cory Gardner, Senator from Colorado, who's been doing a lot of work on this in the United States Senate. And Perlmutter, who's been working on the banking side of this, but also working on the PPP stuff. Jason Crow, Congressman Blumenauer from Oregon, and any number of other federal legislators. But I'll open the floor to you guys to see if you have any thoughts on this. I mean, we've kind of covered it in bits and pieces, but there is a big push right now, and just curious if you guys have any thoughts to add to that, to my tirade / soapbox sermon here.
I think you did a good job.
Yeah.
By the way, for the record, my facility smells like chocolate. So
True.
it's very good.
It's a beautiful facility.
It is a beautiful facility. All you guys you run great businesses, but again, like I tell people, these are still jobs, right? These are jobs at the end of the day. And, I think the biggest perspective, sort of the thing that resets me every time, is when you take especially like a federal legislator from another state, and they go through one of your guys' facilities for the first time, and they're kind of looking around and seeing cameras and people wearing, coats, and, and they're like, wow, and like the cleanliness and everything else. And it's really eye-opening for them, because these are not only are they, these are higher paying jobs than many other industries, and they're incredibly professional, so it's obviously really disappointing, but we are getting a lot of good headway, at least having the conversation at the federal level now.
Yeah, and I think it's the thing that, like, I'm hopeful that legislators, can see when they come visit any of our facilities or any business that's operating meaningfully in the cannabis space, is that, not only are they good jobs with employing folks from like incredibly diverse backgrounds, but like this is establishing the basis on which many of these families will grow, how they'll build their future. So many of us focus on how do we develop our employees meaningfully so that they're the best possible versions of their professional selves. And we're taxed even more for that because we don't get any of that benefit. So like the fact that, 280E exists and other IRS treatment to the cannabis industry specifically, it actually punishes us harder for trying to be better employers, which is incredibly challenging in this time.
Yeah, no, very well said. Dan, I don't know if you want to jump in and add anything. If not, we can definitely, I've got several more things I want to get to with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what everyone has already said. If there's anything that comes out of this, the last several weeks or months, is that, when you're an essential business, it means that not only do your customers and clients rely upon you and your patients rely upon you, but it also means that the state and local and frankly federal governments are relying upon you for a different reason, meaning you're keeping commerce flowing, and allowing some semblance of economic activity to continue, while at the same time serving your clients and patients and customers. So if you want to lump us in with the rest of the essential businesses, we're happy to, we'll happily accept. But we out of fairness, we have to experience both the benefits and the burdens, not just one or the other.
No, very, very well said, Dan. I'm going to shift gears back to sort of how the industry is going right now and some other things. This is kind of keying off a question that someone asked, but I'll broaden it. We hear a lot of talk about cannabis being a sort of a recession-resistant industry, at least the product itself. I'm curious for your guys' perspective, and the specific question that was asked is, what are the sales expectations, for the next few months, quarters? We saw that initial surge, which I mentioned, which was people stocking up, but are you guys modeling these things out? I mean, gosh, every model I've made, I've thrown out about 4 days later, but on any number of things, but curious if you guys are thinking about how you guys are thinking about that.
If your models have lasted 4 days, then you are doing a pretty good job, Christian. Yeah, absolutely. We're modeling out what does the future look like and being, I'd say, somewhat light touch about it, because the assumptions on which we're building these models seem to be proven false on a daily basis. I'd say for us, just being smart with our dollars, smart with trying to secure the employment situation for as many of our staff or all of our staff, including the ones that we've unfortunately had to move on from for a period of time. Like, we're projecting that sales will still be down across the state 20+% for the next few months. And we'll see what happens when we move more to the safer at home model versus the shelter in place model. And we're hopeful that that means that people are still being respectful and safe in the way that they're engaging in the public, but they're able to come and visit our businesses moving forward at a slightly higher clip so that we can, go back to being the job engine and tax engine that we have been in the past.
I'll jump in.
Dan or Chuck, sorry, I was just waiting for either of you guys to jump on in though.
I was looking at Dan and he was looking at me, so I'll jump in. Yeah, I would have to say that I go with Ryan's forecast, and given that Native Roots is a customer of ours, and I guess, Ryan, I can assume that our orders are going to be down 20%. Now you have some products in there that I would try and encourage you to replace us with, so maybe the overall order can go up. But we can talk about that offline. So I think that's right, but I think that again, I didn't want to steal Dan's thunder since he closed a public trade and renamed a company all in one day and celebrated 420. So that was a monumental accomplishment for him. As some people know, we announced a merger about a month and a half ago. We targeted to have the merger executed, definitive agreements by the middle of April. COVID slowed us down just a little bit, but I'm happy to announce that very soon, as in this week, you'll see an announcement that says that we've consummated our transaction. I can say that even as a public company because the stock is halted trading right now due to the event. So probably not in any trouble by my general counsel for talking about it. But for us, to me, it was the same thing as Dan said. Full steam ahead. We got to make this work. I've been doing this for 10 years. That's why I look like this. And the reality is, we're constantly coming up against obstacles. We're constantly having to figure out how to do something different, to pivot off of, what we thought we were doing down a different direction because it's either a regulatory issue, a capital markets issue, a compliance requirement that comes up, but we're just in this case, absolute devotion to public safety for both our employees as well as our customers. So, I would just say the soundbite to investors is this is an industry that's resilient. That this is an industry that is, I don't know if it's recession proof or recession resistant, because I do think we're all going to feel the effect of the customer not having quite as much money for the next few months, if not longer. But as an industry, we will survive. And well-run companies with well-run and strong management teams like the gentlemen that are on this panel, these are the companies you want to bet on, because these are the ones that have overcome all those obstacles and are still standing and are going to continue to go forward. And so I'm super bullish about the industry and obviously our own company, but our ability to get through this.
Great. And congrats on everything, Chuck. That's great to hear.
Thanks.
Dan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, same congratulations to you, Chuck. Yeah, I mean, you just got to keep moving forward. And what the secret sauce that we have is not secret. I mean, it's hard work. It's looking at the numbers every single day at open and every single day at close. See what our customers are doing, seeing what where folks are going. Generally speaking, we are going to get caught up here to the consumer quickly. Ryan's already doing it with delivery and Superior and Boulder, but to enter into a retail storefront and shop is becoming a thing of the past. And so with the onset of e-commerce and delivery in 2021 for recreational, I think that's going to be, we're all going to have to adjust to that model and be ready and prepared for that new business. But it's all going to be driven by analytics and data. For those who want to get a delivery, they'll get that. If for those who want to continue to shop in our storefronts, we will do that. But I think it's like anything else, because we're so highly regulated, really at three different levels. Our ability to eke out EBITDA and margins is only as good as our current ability to navigate the regulatory framework. And so we're we're monitoring, our sales every day. And I'm not sure that if there is a model that is predictive of this, would love to see it and and understand it. Every time we see like we have a climb in the market, another announcement comes and it drops, 500 points or 600 points or wherever it may be, and it makes it just to sort of cap the point. It makes it tough on investors because they're trying to decide how they're going to place their capital and figure out what their next move is, and they don't have a good sense of the market themselves. Uncertainty in the market, as we all know, breeds stability and maintaining the status quo, and the industry is the opposite of the status quo. So we've got a lot of opportunity here. I think if there was any industry I would want to be in, it would be this one right now, just because I think a lot of history is going to be made. A lot of things, people are saying things aren't going to happen that will happen, but it's going to be because of hard work, dedicated skill sets, and frankly some luck. There's going to be some luck involved here, and we're just hoping that there's enough to go around for all of us. And kind of going back to the opening point about employees and about team, from frontline to CEO, we've got to remain aligned and communicating in order to get the job done. And I think that's what we're going to have to do collectively as an industry, and as we do this economic rebuild, is keeping an eye on each other, making sure everyone's okay, and doing our best to lift by rising. So, that's what we hope for.
Oh, very well said. You mentioned fundraising and sort of investors and other things. I am curious, I've heard some anecdotally from some people that there's some investors that want to kind of get out of the stock market and are looking at this industry. That's obviously one perspective. Obviously I think a larger perspective is everyone's just sort of hunkered down right now. But for, I think all of you guys, if you're not raising money, you're close to, people who are trying to raise money to fund projects or expansion or other things. What does fundraising look like? Is it totally frozen up right now, or are there still some opportunities out there?
I'll just say what I can, because we are a publicly traded company, about what's going on, what we're just seeing in the market.
Yeah.
Which is there are folks who are extremely interested, in this space right now, to the degree that folks do see some ability to weather the storm on the recession. That's intriguing to folks. But I can tell you probably the top things that investors and folks who are looking to place capital are looking at this point is just management teams. Yeah. And looking at solid top management teams to put their, people don't invest in companies, they invest in people. And I think, someone who's looking to be bullish about this industry is looking to the people who are going to take it to that next level. And I think, credit to Colorado and its pioneer status from day one. The mature market that we've seen still shows tremendous growth opportunities, unlike other states, and to say that in this environment says something about the industry, and the players involved. And the industry's ripe for consolidation and roll up, and I think everyone knows that. So it is the convergence of a lot of different economic indicators for investors, that they're not necessarily saying I'm not interested. They're saying tell me more, and maybe not in the next 30 days, but maybe in the next quarter, if they're showing any hesitancy, is my feel of things.
Interesting. No, thanks, Dan. Chuck, did you have something there?
Only, again, just to be beating the drum in a positive way. This industry's already gone through a capital markets contraction last year. It's going through consolidation, which was a natural and inevitable component of an emerging industry. And just kind of when we thought the water was safe to go back into, here comes the COVID virus to really kind of keep it down again a little bit from an investor perspective. That's exactly the right time to get into a market like this, or an industry like this. Again, to the point that I think Dan made, look for good companies, look for good management teams, look for those that have a lot of heritage and experience so they know how to weather these storms. But, unlike the overall market that was really on a super high before March, the beginning of March, we've already taken our lumps as a public industry. And so, I just think there's a lot of buying opportunities. Now, you have to be patient and you have to have a long view of things. But I think if you do, you'll be rewarded.
Yeah, I agree to that. I think what we've consistently seen in this time frame proves the point that consumers and individuals across the United States and beyond are huge fans of the cannabis product for wellness, for relief, for relaxation, for myriad reasons, for more medicinal specific purposes and beyond. And that hasn't really changed. This is a business that is built on pure consumer demand and not necessarily speculation on the movement of some other, some investor abstraction. We see people engaged in this business meaningfully, coming to our shops meaningfully. I think the thing that all of us could echo the point on is the important thing for what we see from investors right now is the ability to operate and execute, and to be both efficient as well as mission-driven, values-aligned, meaningful operators. And Colorado has created a breed of those like no other state really has up to this point. So yeah. I think the folks on this panel, I feel lucky to be hanging out with them, at least virtually, because it's a group of individuals that represents what good looks like. And with all the points previously made, I think that that's always going to be interesting to investors.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the kind words on behalf of the other folks on the call. The feeling is mutual, Ryan. We're coming up near the end of the allotted 2 hours. Maybe we'll end a couple minutes early because I want to just sort of send it out on a predictive note to see if you guys have. I'm just curious what your guys sort of. I know we're all going to be wrong, but this is being recorded, so we can look back at this. But curious what you guys think. The world, more broadly, but also specifically to sort of cannabis, the industry as a whole. What do you think the next 3 months, 6 months, year looks like? And, I'll start out by saying, perhaps legalization in more states, perhaps local governments coming around quicker, perhaps some federal movement. Just curious what your guys' thoughts are.
Yeah, my thought is there's going to be a short period of time where cannabis legalization is maybe not the most urgent priority, but I do expect that to be pretty short term, maybe this legislative cycle or whatnot. I do see this as a meaningful engine for job creation, for tax creation, moving forward. And I think that is going to be obvious to a number of states and communities around Colorado and beyond that see and view this as an opportunity to really put people back to work, to get this economy moving again, and to do what people are asking for, which is provide them the ability to choose and how they like to participate in both their wellness as well as their relief. So I see long-term that this is an incredible challenge to the economy right now. And the cannabis industries have certainly had to weather some of those difficulties as well. But I think it's both making stronger companies, stronger operators, and a platform for really effective business growth moving forward, and the ability to touch and engage with more individuals across the country.
Well, very well said. Dan, you want to jump in? What do you think the next year entails? 3 months?
I think the one thing that we're going to predict here is change. So things are going to continue to change. One thing that happened that I hope continues is, and again, I think it'll bolster our ability to argue for changes at the banking level or at the merchant level, which is, folks theoretically are allowed to order online. And if your banking institution allows it, receive payment online, which, for anyone who's not in the cannabis business sounds crazy. Like, why are you even mentioning that? It's because, a lot of merchants, credit cards and whatnot can't be used in the cannabis space. But because of the changes, because of the COVID, we've seen a regulatory change, which, frankly, I probably was worth keeping around. We haven't, seen anything, detrimental from having online transactions. And I think what it does is it draws more attention for solutions in the space to come to Colorado and provide those opportunities. So that's one modest prediction, is that online ordering, at least transactions, will continue to stay around. And part of that is just based on the concept that even though we may go back to quote unquote normal, there's some social distancing that is going to stay in effect for quite some time. And that's a great way to create that social distancing. So that's one. I think from a year from now, I think, because we're such a mature market, and we're going to delve into delivery, I think we'll see other more social aspects. I think the social club piece will continue to grow and expand in ways that we haven't really thought about, fleshed out completely. But I think the tasting room, social club component of the market will grow. And I think for sure, just the analytics driving the consumer experience are definitely going to strengthen. We've got some analytics right now, but I don't think we've seen anything as sophisticated as other industries. I think that's going to change in how we engage in advertising and marketing to our to our customers, patients, etc. I think that's going to change. So that's the sort of short cannabis oriented predictions. I think to Ryan's point, there are going to be a lot of towns and localities that are going to be looking for sources of tax revenue to replace what they've lost, and it's going to take a lot of those jurisdictions a long time to replace those sales tax revenues, and they may see cannabis as an opportunity to replace that. And I think they can convince their constituents, the elected officials can convince their constituents that this isn't as bad as they thought it was, and the fact that it's been considered an essential business throughout this, and people have been served, and nothing detrimental has happened, I think is a big boost. So those are predictions there.
Yeah, that's great. Chuck, we'll end with you. Any thoughts?
Well, that's a lot of pressure. Well, first of all, my first thought is, Christian, thanks for doing such a good job moderating this. Good news is you've been able to work with the three of us for many years in the past, so you know how to handle us. So excellent job. Thank you. And thank you to University of Colorado for allowing us to be on and spend some time with you and the attendees today. I'll just say I've already given you my prediction earlier on in one of my answers, and I think that, you know, again, having been in the industry for a long time, I've always looked for catalysts for change. What's the catalyst for the change for the industry that's going to take it into more normalization? And, you know, when we went from medical to recreational, and we did it in that year that 3 states went at the same time, and it was like, wow, this is going to be, you know, a big deal. This is really going to move it along. And it didn't, but it opened up the gates for more states to come on board and to start really looking at this as a viable industry. You know, when we look at elections and we say, well, geez, you know, if Hillary wins, are we going to be there faster, as opposed to if Trump wins? And, you know, I think we're already making some of those kind of predictions or forward looks with the upcoming election. But I think this has really been a catalyst that's going to put us more and more in the conversation. And it's more in the conversation of, this is a big industry and it's getting ready to get bigger, because there's people that need jobs that this industry is going to be able to fill. It's also, to Dan and Ryan's point, there's municipalities, cities, and now frankly states and federal government that needs money from lost tax revenue, and they're going to look at every opportunity to get it. And the cannabis industry is going to be able to stand up and say, oh, we can provide that. So I think we become really part of the conversation going forward, even more than we have been. And I believe that this is a catalyst for real change. Now, when does federal legalization really occur? You know, I don't have that crystal ball, but I'd say it's a lot shorter time frame than it probably was before this event. So,
Yeah. Well, very, very well said, all of you guys. Yeah, I want to take the opportunity to thank the University of Colorado, but in particular thank Chuck, Ryan, and Dan for spending 2 hours. I've learned a ton. I look forward to the June 15th webinar, and also my prediction is that at the 2021 Cannabis Entrepreneurship Academy, I will buy you guys a drink, or we'll enjoy some other legal substance together, and I look forward to doing that.
fantastic.
Christian, Chuck, Ryan, Dan, thank you all for doing this today. We will find a way to share this out with the people who could not attend, and we're also going to write up a short summary about this. But you've shared so much just invaluable information and insight today. Very much appreciate your time.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Yep.
See you.
Thanks, guys. Everyone be safe, be healthy.
Take care, guys.
Take care.
Bye.